This week on Jerusalem Dateline, it's all about light, a Christmas and Hanukkah special. We'll take a look at the beginning of how Christmas, as we know it, came to be celebrated, and the 8 days of Hanukkah, a victory story, plus the story behind a beloved Christmas carol. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. I'm here in the Christian quarter of Jerusalem's Old City. The Bible tells us some of the details about the miraculous birth of Jesus, born in Bethlehem and laid in a manger, but it doesn't tell us the date or whether to celebrate it. So how did the church come to revere the holiday of Christmas? That's the topic behind CBN's documentary, Christmas, the Story Behind the Traditions. Produced by Aaron Zimmerman and narrated by Gordon Robertson, here's some excerpts from that film.
More than 2,000 years ago, a baby was born in a distant corner of the Roman Empire, in the small town of Bethlehem in Judea. It was a simple birth, but one that would reverberate around the world. For the next 2,000 years, the story of the Nativity would be celebrated, debated, exaggerated, and sometimes even banned. But today, the birth of Christ is the biggest holiday on the Western calendar.
There's so much to Christmas, and the reason it survived so many different ways, so many time periods, is it has so many different meanings. You can celebrate the awesomeness of God. You can prophesy His second coming. You can look back to God's promises in the Old Testament. The incarnation is a big thing to celebrate, totally upending every concept of how a God would appear. Not in a palace, not in majesty, not with power, not with might. Helplessness. He has to be sheltered by a young woman. How could we not love a God who puts Himself through that for us?
Only the Gospels of Matthew and Luke tell the story of Jesus' birth. It wasn't mentioned in the letters of the Apostle Paul, and the first century church never celebrated the Nativity. It wasn't until 200 years later that Christians became interested in Christmas. So why the sudden change of heart?
One of the things that provoked a change in their thinking was the rise of a heresy called Gnosticism. And Gnosticism believed that Jesus only had a spiritual presence, that He only seemed to be here. In order to counter this heresy, Christian theologians had to stress the physicality of Jesus, His birthplace, the place in a cave or an animal shelter where He was born, the fact that He was wrapped in swaddling clothes. All of that became important to stress that Jesus had an actual physical body that suffered on the cross.
So how did December 25th become the date for Christmas?
We have so few dates associated with Jesus' life and death. The only thing that the early church really knew was that, according to the Gospel of John, Jesus died on the 14th of Nisan at Passover time. That's a fixed date in the Jewish calendar. And really, that date became a key to unlock for the early church what they would propose to be the date of His birth. In Jewish thought, there was an expectation that creation and redemption would take place on the same day. Now, the Christians knew with certainty that Jesus died at Passover. Tertullian suggested that in the year that Jesus died, the 14th of Nisan fell on March 25th. Why was this important to them? If creation and redemption happen on the same day, then they assumed that Jesus was conceived on the same day that He died. And then the next part was a simple math forward. add 9 months, and we go from March 25th to December 25th. In the West, working from the Church Fathers prior to the time of Constantine, we see the establishment of December 25th already as the date in which we commemorate the birth of Jesus.
In 336, the Church of Rome officially proclaimed December 25th as Dies Natalis Christi, or the birthday of Christ. But while Western Christians accepted that date, the Eastern Church celebrated on January 6th. So what did the earliest Christmas celebrations look like?
They didn't really have public churches at this point. They're meeting in houses, in just rooms, often in secret as well. So I think in those early days, you have very private, secret, and quite solemn celebrations of Christmas. And it's really only once you start to get Christianity on the rise in the Roman Empire, in around about the sort of 300s AD, that suddenly you have bigger celebrations of Christmas.
What did they do on Christmas? The celebration of a Mass, which is, of course, the preaching of the gospel, and the Lord's Supper in honor of the birth of Christ. It's Christ Mass. At Christmas, a Mass would be said after sunset before sunrise, like the tradition of going to midnight Mass. Where does that come from? It comes from the early practice of the earliest Christians in the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th centuries, when they would go to a midnight Mass to celebrate the birth of Jesus.
After 1,800 years of controversy, materialism, and a date that can't really be proven as the birth date of Christ, some may ask, why should we even celebrate Christmas? The answer can only be found by returning to the original story.
Christmas marks the birth of Christ. An otherwise distant God becomes an infant. He comes and says to us, "I love you," but he says it through the cry of a baby. We celebrate this humbling of God himself as God lays aside his divinity and wishes to meet each one of us, not to judge us, but to save us and to bestow on us the true life.
The festival has produced so much beauty, so much human goodness. The story of the Nativity, even if you reject it, leaks into everything. The tenderness of the baby, but also the presence of angels, God's declaration of love for humanity. That seeps into everything. You know, how many times have we been generous to people because it's Christmas? So God bless Christmas.
Why should we celebrate this? What's the point? You know, is it all made up anyway? Bah humbug is what I would say to that. Santa Claus, in its origins, is a generous bishop who particularly had an attention for the poor and the people who needed help. It wasn't about pushy present buying. It was about helping people in need. And then the Dickensian Christmas and Washington Irving's cozy family Christmas, putting family at its heart and generosity and charity. And these are all very good things. And over the years, yes, we can easily forget, I think, a lot of those charitable and generous attributes to do with Christmas. But I think at its heart, it's a good festival and it's about spreading love and joy and having a goodwill to all men. So, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us everyone.
Up next, Hanukkah. It's a celebration more than 2,000 years old. See how the holiday is celebrated in Jerusalem's Old City. For 8 days, Jewish people around the world celebrate Hanukkah. It's a holiday marking a great victory more than 2,000 years ago. Earlier, we went to the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem to meet one family and take a look at the festive lights. Thousands of Israelis come to Jerusalem's Old City at Hanukkah to celebrate and see the lights. All over the world, Jews say special prayers, thanking God for miracles past and present, and light a special candelabra or menorah called a Hanukkah for 8 days.
This is a holiday about spirituality. This is a holiday about values. This is a holiday about connecting to God. So many Israelis come here. Everybody's attracted to the light.
Also known as the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah is not mentioned in the Old Testament, but it is in the New Testament. Now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. CBN News joined Rebecca Spiro and her family for the Jewish celebration.
It's a holiday that celebrates religious freedom and our victory against oppression and our ability to rededicate the temple.
And her children?
The presents and the parties and the latkes.
We have groups coming all the time, and we go on trips, and it's fun, and it's just fun.
In the 2nd century BC, the Jewish people in Judea revolted against the Syrian Greek conquerors. The Seleucids tried to impose their culture, forcing the Jews to eat pork and forbidding Sabbath observance, Torah reading, and circumcision. Worse still, the Seleucids defiled the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and dedicated it to the Greek god Zeus. Led by a priestly family known as the Maccabees, the Jewish people retook Jerusalem and rededicated the temple. But when they wanted to light the menorah, there was only a tiny bit of sacred olive oil left.
We celebrate the 8 days that the menorah burned, which is a miracle. It was beyond nature, and also the military victory.
Eating fried foods like potato pancakes and jelly donuts is another Hanukkah tradition. Spiro's family and neighbors also have their own personal tradition to build unity between secular and religious Israelis.
Every single year we bring out a table of drinks, and thousands of people come to the Old City for Hanukkah to look around and see the menorahs and light, and then we give out hot drinks to all the people that come.
Spiro says there's a message in the holiday for today.
The world's coming up against Israel. The wolves are circling the sheep. This is nothing new. And the message of Hanukkah is that no matter what happens, our candles burn bright. And civilizations have come and gone, but the Jewish people are still here.
Up next, meet an Arab Christian shopkeeper in Jerusalem who makes Christmas come alive throughout the year.
This business was bought through my grandfather, and my uncle and my father worked in it.
One of the favorite Christmas gifts is olive wood carvings made from trees here in the Holy Land. Meet Zach Mizriki, an Arab Christian shopkeeper that works with artisans in Bethlehem to create carvings that celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ.
I'm Zach Mizriki. I'm a local Jerusalemite since hundreds of years. My family have been here. I sell lots of biblical items and olive wood, coins from the 1st century.
300 years BC coin. Wow.
This business was bought through my grandfather, and my uncle and my father worked in it, but we closed it for many years, and I just restarted it a few years back.
Yes, thank you very much. God bless you.
Christian missionaries, when they came to the country in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they started to see that they need to teach people handicrafts in order to support their survival and make them stay here in the Holy Land. Still, there is many Christian families in the Holy Land here, and some local Christians from the West Bank who does all of my olive wood. Olive tree for traditional farmers in the Holy Land means a lot. First of all, we look at it in the Bible. The dove that came to Noah came back with an olive branch. So olive means hope. We have many proverbs in Arabic connected to olives and oil. If you dream of olive tree, it means something good is going to happen. It's very connected to the Middle East and to people here. There's few kinds of olive tree. Mostly we choose the old Roman. It's a very solid tree that lives for thousands of years. It doesn't grow big, but it's always condensed and strong. So if you go to places in Jerusalem, you see that there is olive trees, fields since the Roman period. And this is where we focus on, because these trees, it's 700 years old or 1,500 years old. This is what kind of moves us. So we don't cut it, in purpose, of course, but if they're opening a road or someone is building a home, then we take it and do what we have to do. So we cut it. We dry it for a few years. We decide from the beginning what it's going to be. The guy that works with me, he can see it from far away. He can look at it and say, this tree or these woods going to be Christmas ornaments, let's say, or nativity. They carve biblical stories into wood and people enjoy it. It's beautiful and lives for a long time. And we like it because it's a family heirloom, from a mother to a daughter, from a father to son. We're helping local Christians to have their basic life through the business so that they can have a good income, more food on their table. I think everybody's having a hard time to find work in the West Bank. The number of Christians is decreasing dramatically since 20 years. In 1966 and 65, Christians were around 65,000. Today we're around 10. So this can help them to think of God more, pray more, and stay here, because their existence here in this country is very important.
Coming up, a look at one of the most loved Christmas carols of all time. One of my favorite Christmas carols is O Come, Emmanuel. Here's the story behind the song, explained by Claire Fawn of the University of the Holy Land and performed beautifully by violinist Maurice Sklar in St. Anne's Church here in Jerusalem.
O Come, Emmanuel is really a beloved hymn, and most people don't realize that this hymn was composed to be an Advent song, not a Christmas carol at all. Each one is based on one of the titles of the Messiah that is found in the Old Testament. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. Emmanuel, of course, is the title given to the Messiah in Isaiah chapter 7, where Isaiah prophesies that a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and will call his name Emmanuel. The Gospel of Matthew applies this very scripture to Jesus at his birth. Another one of the titles applied to the Messiah that was adapted into the song is the Rod of Jesse. O come, thou Rod of Jesse, come. The Rod of Jesse is referred to in Isaiah chapter 11, and the Rod of Jesse refers, of course, to the kingship, to the ruling. Jesse was the father of David, and so when we sing of the Rod of Jesse, we're singing of the descendant of David, the Messiah, Jesus. One of the verses calls for the dayspring from on high to arise. O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our hearts. The dayspring refers to Malachi chapter 4, where we read that the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in his wings. This verse does not refer as much to the kingship of the Messiah, but it refers to his tenderness, to his personalness, to his compassion for those who are weary, for those who suffer and toil, for those who are ill, crying out that the dayspring, the Son of Righteousness, will come with healing, not only for our bodies, but for our hearts, our souls, and our spirits. Many of the titles that are used in the hymn O Come, Emmanuel come from the book of Isaiah. Another one is the Key of David. O come, thou Key of David, come and open up the way to our heavenly home. The Key of David comes from Isaiah 22, and it speaks of that opening to passage, to freedom of access that is echoed in the book of Revelation, when Jesus, in the book of Revelation, gives the Key of David, which opens doors that no man can shut. Another very beautiful theme that is touched on in the hymn is when they refer to the Messiah as the Lord of Might. The Lord of Might, of course, comes from Isaiah, when it speaks in Isaiah chapter 11 that upon him will rest the spirit of counsel and wisdom and might and understanding. But the hymn reflects on the Lord of Might as being the one who gives the word of the Lord. On Sinai's height gave the law. And of course, the word of the Lord is not simply the law, but it's really Jesus himself. Jesus is the Word of God. The song, O Come, Emmanuel, is evoking that longing and expectation that we have. We celebrate that Jesus has already come, but we know that something is not yet complete. So it's a very beautiful song because it has an echo of the past, but a tremendous anticipation of that glorious coming when the rod of Jesse, the key of David, the one who is almighty, God with us, will establish his kingdom on earth. I like to think of Emmanuel, God with me today, God perfectly present, God who brings his salvation at this moment, God who became Jesus, who showed his love for us in laying down his life, who calls me by name, who calls each of us by name, who loves us as a father, who loves us as a shepherd, who loves us as a king. Today he cries out for the salvation of each human being. Today is the day of salvation. We don't have to wait till tomorrow. We can celebrate Emmanuel, God with us today.
Well, that's a wonderful song at this time of year. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. To all our Jewish friends, Happy Hanukkah. And to Christians around the world, Joyeux Noel, Feliz Navidad, and Merry Christmas from the Holy Land. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.